So have you ever sat down to play a game, just to unwind for a bit, and you blink, and suddenly you look at the clock, and like 3 entire hours have just vanished?
Oh, absolutely. The classic, just one more level phenomenon.
Right. And I feel like we usually just brush that off as an accident or, I mean, maybe just a byproduct of having some free time. But that feeling of total, absolute immersion, it's actually a meticulously engineered psychological state.
It really is. What you're experiencing in those lost hours, it isn't just passive entertainment. It's a highly structured, deliberate manipulation of human attention.
Yeah.
Game designers are essentially acting as behavioral psychologists, right? They're crafting an environment where your brain is actively rewarded for staying engaged and subtly punished or redirected the second your attention starts to drift.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Mm.
Because our mission for today's deep dive is to really tear down the walls of that psychological architecture. We want to figure out exactly why we get so intensely hooked on certain games while others, just make us yawn and walk away.
Right, the million-dollar question in game design.
Exactly. And to do this, we are pulling from a really fantastic stack of sources. We've got our course modules on play psychology and game flow, alongside some of the seminal texts on game design from Jesse Schell, Scott Rogers, Katie Salen, Eric Zimmerman, and Raf Koster.
Which is such a foundational stack for understanding any interactive media, really. And to set the stage for all of this, we really have to anchor ourselves to the core concept that drives almost all successful game design.
The big theory.
Yeah, it's called flow theory. It's a framework that was originally developed by the renowned psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi.
Always a mouthful to say.
It is, yeah. But his work is incredible. Today, we're going to explore the really delicate science of how designers balance challenge and skill to keep players suspended in what Csikszentmihalyi famously calls the flow state.
So, to really understand how games hook us, I think we first have to talk about what is literally happening in our brains when, the rest of the physical world just sort of falls away.
Right.
Because flow is a word we throw around a lot in corporate jargon, right? It's like, oh, I was in a flow state at my desk. But he defines it very specifically, doesn't he?
He does. It isn't just zoning out in front of the television. That's a passive state. The flow state is a feeling of complete energized focus.
Energized being the key word there.
Exactly. You're actively engaged, you're processing information rapidly, and you're experiencing a really high level of fulfillment. And the key descriptor he uses for this state is that it is autotelic.
Okay, let me break that word down real quick. So auto meaning self and kilos meaning goal or purpose. So the activity is its own goal.
That is the magic of it right there. An autotelic experience is a self-contained activity where just doing the thing is its own reward.
Which is pretty rare in real life, I mean.
Totally. In normal life, human motivation is usually tied to extrinsic rewards. You go to work to get a paycheck.
Right.
You clean your house so you don't live in filth. But in a flow state, you aren't playing the game for a future real-world benefit. You're playing it purely because the cognitive act of playing just feels inherently good to your brain.
Which brings up the obvious question, right? How do game designers actually manufacture that feeling?
Right.
Because if you're building a 60-hour experience, you can't just cross your fingers and hope the player randomly stumbles into an autotelic state.
No, absolutely not. Designers actually map this out visually using a concept called the flow channel.
Okay, a graph.
Yeah, picture a graph. Csikszentmihalyi visualizes this as a narrow diagonal channel. So on the y-axis, you have challenge. On the x-axis, you have skill.
Got it.
If your skill at a task outpaces the challenge being presented, you drop out of the channel into boredom.
That makes sense.
But if the challenge spikes way faster than your current skill level, you hit a wall and drop into anxiety. So flow is that razor-thin tightrope right in the middle, moving upward and to the right, where the challenge of the game perfectly meets your evolving abilities.
Okay, to bring this out of the abstract, the sources, well, specifically Jesse Schell in The Art of Game Design, he uses this great analogy.
Oh, the tennis one.
Yeah, the tennis one. He talks about a hypothetical kid named Alex who's learning to play tennis. So imagine Alex stepping onto the court for the very first time. He has practically zero skill, right?
Right, completely fresh.
So if the challenge is just hitting the ball over the net once, which is an incredibly low challenge, Alex is actually going to enjoy it. His brain isn't overwhelmed. The low challenge perfectly matches his low skill.
Exactly.
He's on that tightrope. He's right in the flow channel.
The difficulty is entirely appropriate for his rudimentary abilities, which means his cognitive load is manageable. He feels, real sense of agency and progression.
But wait, so does a game designer just draw a straight diagonal line up the middle of this graph and call it a day?
Not at all.
Because speaking as a player, my skill level never feels like a perfectly smooth, straight upward trajectory. Like I stumble, I get stuck on a boss, and then suddenly I figure out a mechanic and my skill just jumps ahead.
Right, and that dynamic, unpredictable nature of human learning is exactly why drawing a straight line is terrible design.
It doesn't work.
No, because human skill improvement happens in plateaus and then sudden leaps. Let's look back at Alex on the tennis court. After 2 weeks of practice, his skill naturally increases.
He's getting better.
Yeah, but if the challenge stays exactly the same, like if his coach just keeps asking him to lazily hit the ball over the net, Alex has completely outgrown the activity.
The balance is broken.
Exactly. He has fallen off the tightrope.
Which means game designers have to constantly anticipate our shifting skills. They have to play this incredibly complex game of psychological cat and mouse just to keep us inside that channel.
They do.
Because think about the last time you actually quit a game.
Yeah.
Like you didn't just passively stop playing.
Yeah.
You either quit because playing felt like a tedious, mindless chore,
The boredom.
or you quit because you were gripping your controller so hard your knuckles turned white and you wanted to throw through the television.
And those are the two exact traps outside of the flow channel.
Twin traps.
Yeah. The tedious chore is the boredom zone, where your skill has totally eclipsed the challenge. And that white knuckle frustration is the anxiety zone, where the challenge has entirely eclipsed your skill.
It's like Alex suddenly being forced to play against a professional tennis player on day 2.
Exactly. His agency is stripped away, and his brain interprets the scenario as a threat rather than a puzzle.
Okay, but let me push back on this anxiety zone concept for a second.
Sure.
Because the sources specifically bring up notoriously punishing video games, like Dark Souls or Demon Souls.
Yeah.
If you've ever played them, they seem like they are basically 100% anxiety. You die constantly. The game is just brutal. So if anxiety naturally pushes players out of the flow state, why are those games universally praised? Like, why do people voluntarily subject themselves to that?
That is a really crucial paradox to unravel, and the answer lies in a distinction made by game designer Scott Rogers. We have to completely separate the concept of difficulty from the concept of challenge.
Interesting. Because to a layman, those sound like synonyms.
They do, but in behavioral design, they are entirely different tools.
Okay, so I'm thinking about those old arcade cabinets from the 1980s. The ones designed specifically to eat as many of your quarters as possible in 10 minutes.
Oh, yeah, the quarter munchers.
Right. The game would just overwhelm you with enemies you couldn't possibly dodge. That feels like pure difficulty.
That is the perfect example of difficulty. Rogers argues that difficulty is a system that simply promotes arbitrary pain and loss. It's a toll booth.
It doesn't care if you're good.
Exactly. It doesn't care about your skill. It just wants your quarter. Challenge, on the other hand, is a system that promotes skill acquisition and improvement. So Dark Souls might feel incredibly punishing, but it's built entirely on the architecture of challenge.
Because in a game like Dark Souls, when you die, you almost always know exactly why you died.
Right.
Like you swung your sword a second too late or you rolled the wrong way. The game has strict, consistent rules.
Precisely. It confronts you with massive obstacles, but it gives you the exact tools required to overcome them.
That's fair.
It's fair. Death isn't a failure state in a challenging game. It is a data-gathering exercise.
That's a great way to put it.
You're learning the enemy's attack patterns. You're acquiring knowledge. So while it is tense, it isn't true anxiety because you still maintain your agency. True anxiety only happens when the player feels they have no control over the outcome.
Okay, I see. So a poorly designed, purely difficult game kills you for no reason. But a masterfully designed, challenging game kills you to teach you a lesson.
Exactly. But when designers realize their game is crossing that line from a tough challenge into true frustrating anxiety, they have to intervene.
They have to save the player.
Right. But they don't just lazily make the enemies weaker. They use actionable, invisible systems to catch the player. And one of the most fascinating methods is dynamic difficulty adjustment.
Oh, this is so cool. The sources highlight the AI director from the cooperative zombie game Left 4 Dead, which is just a brilliant implementation of this.
There really is.
Because this isn't just a static difficulty setting you pick from a menu before you start playing, right? The game is literally reading your physiological and in-game stress indicators in real time.
Yeah, it functions like a digital dungeon master. The director algorithm is constantly monitoring your health, how much ammo you've burned through, where you are physically located on the map, and even how much damage your team has taken in the last 60 seconds.
And so if the algorithm realizes you were getting absolutely crushed and you're tipping over the edge into that anxiety zone, it dynamically alters the game world.
Yep.
It might decide to spawn fewer zombies in the next room or, you know, quietly drop a much-needed health pack just around the corner. It artificially manipulates the environment to pull you back down onto the tightrope of the flow channel.
But the real psychological trick here is that the AI director has to remain entirely invisible to the player.
Right, because if you notice it,
Yeah, if you realize the game took pity on you and gave you a health pack because you were playing poorly, the illusion of mastery just shatters. You feel patronized.
nobody wants a pity health pack.
Exactly. The system has to maintain the illusion that you survived against all odds, preserving your sense of agency.
And I imagine designers have to do the exact same thing for the boredom trap, right?
Absolutely.
Because if a player is too skilled, they get bored. So to fix that, without alienating novice players, designers add optional layers of challenge.
Yeah.
Like think of a game where you don't just need to finish a level, but you get a letter grade at the end.
Yeah.
A novice player is thrilled to just get a passing C's grade and survive the experience. They are in their flow state.
Meanwhile, a highly skilled player playing the exact same level will naturally set their own internal autotelic goal to replay that stage perfectly, just to achieve an A grade.
So the game accommodates both skill levels simultaneously without changing the core mechanics.
Exactly.
But rescuing a frustrated or bored player is really just damage control, right? Like if you are building a massive 40-hour experience, you can't just be doing damage control the whole time.
No, you'd exhaust the player and yourself.
You have to design an experience that doesn't break in the first place.
Yeah.
So how do you chart the actual ideal path through a game?
Well, here's where it gets really interesting. If we look at the bigger picture of human endurance, we realize that a straight upward line implies a constant, never-ending increase in both skill and challenge.
Right.
But human beings are not machines. We are biologically incapable of sustaining maximum psychological and physical intensity indefinitely without suffering from cortisol fatigue.
Meaning, if you keep the tension dialed up to 11 for too long, the player just burns out.
Yes. But if you keep things too calm, the brain gets starved for dopamine and their mind wanders.
So what's the solution?
The solution is to shape the game like a wave. The ideal path through the flow channel is actually an oscillating pattern that bounces back and forth between the very edges of anxiety and boredom.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's the psychological necessity of pacing. The secret to keeping a player engaged for hours is mastering the tense and release cycle.
Tense and release.
Yeah.
The sources point to the classic arcade game Centipede by Raf Coaster to illustrate this on a micro level, right?
Yeah, it's a great example.
When you start a level, the centipede is at the top of the screen. It's totally manageable. But as it gets lower, the screen fills up with mushrooms and spiders, and the cognitive load escalates dramatically.
You are pushed right to the bleeding edge of the anxiety zone.
You're sweating, you're panicked, but then you finally shoot that last piece of the centipede. The screen clears. The music changes.
Release.
Exactly, and you get this brief, glorious rush of relief. Your brain gets a chance to breathe, and you drop all the way back down toward the boredom edge of the channel.
But crucially, just before you actually get bored, the next level starts.
Right, and it's slightly faster than the last one, and the tension ramps right back up. It's almost like interval training for your brain.
That's exactly what it is. And that micro-pacing is essential for a 2-minute arcade loop. But the true test of game design is mapping that wave over a massive cinematic narrative.
Which brings us to Uncharted 2.
Yes. The sources highlight Uncharted 2 as an absolute masterclass in this macro pacing. The developers at Naughty Dog structured the entire game around shifting pillars of gameplay, so you never linger on one emotion long enough to habituate to it.
See, I always assumed pacing in an action game just meant throwing bigger and bigger explosions at the player. Like, why wouldn't you just keep the player in a constant state of excitement?
Because without contrast, excitement just becomes white noise.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
Right. In Uncharted 2, you might start a chapter in a highly intense, frantic firefight in the middle of a war-torn city. Maximum tension. But instead of throwing you into another firefight immediately afterward...
Which would cause that cortisol burnout.
Exactly. The designers force a release. You transition into a slightly calmer environmental puzzle-solving section in a quiet train yard.
And then the intensity slowly builds again as you fight your way up a moving train, culminating in this massive explosive set piece where the train is literally dangling off a cliff.
Right. And following that incredible peak, where do the designers place you? They drop you into the absolute calmest section of the entire game.
Oh, the Tibetan village.
Yes. You wake up in a peaceful Tibetan village. There is no combat. You just slowly walk through the snow, talk to the villagers, and take in the scenery.
It is a complete emotional release. It actually makes me think of the movements in a classical symphony.
Oh, that's a great comparison.
Like you can't just have the brass section blaring at maximum volume for 45 minutes straight. You need the quiet, melancholic string solo so that when the brass finally kicks back in, you actually feel it in your chest.
Yes, the contrast is what creates the emotional resonance. That is exactly how pacing dictates the macro structure of the game.
Right.
But we also need to examine what happens in the micro moments. Because no matter how perfectly a designer maps out that symphony, a player is eventually going to break the intended pacing.
Oh, for sure. They're going to find an exploit and start winning too much, or they'll miss a tutorial and start losing terribly.
Yeah.
So how does a game's ecosystem correct itself in real time?
Well,
Because the developers aren't sitting on the couch next to you tweaking the code while you play.
true. To handle this, designers embed feedback loops deeply into the mechanics.
Okay, when I hear feedback loop, I think of like a screeching microphone. What does this actually look like when I'm holding a controller?
Right, it's a bit different here. These are autonomous, behavior-shaping systems that act as the pulse of the game world. And in game theory, we primarily deal with two types, positive loops and negative loops. And they function in opposite directions.
Let's start with positive or reinforcing feedback loops. How do those work?
The simplest way to conceptualize a positive feedback loop is basically winner stays winning.
Winner stays winning.
Okay. It's a system that rewards success with the tools to achieve even more success.
Like compound interest in a high-yield savings account.
Yeah.
The wealth generates more wealth effortlessly, accelerating your growth.
Exactly. Imagine a racing game where you win the first tournament. As a reward, the game gives you a massive cash payout.
Nice.
You use that cash to buy the best engine in the game. Because your car is now vastly superior to the competition, you win the second tournament even more easily, netting you more cash, which buys better tires, and so on.
Your initial success reinforces your future success. That sounds incredibly satisfying for the player. Like everyone loves feeling overpowered.
Right.
But taking that a step further, wouldn't that eventually destroy the flow channel?
How so?
Well, if my car becomes completely untouchable, my skill and my in-game power will totally outpace the challenge. I'll drop straight into the boredom zone and probably just shut the game off.
Yes, that is the exact systemic danger of relying solely on positive feedback loops. They create thrilling momentum in the short term, but they risk sudden, catastrophic boredom.
The game effectively breaks itself.
It does, which is why designers must counterbalance the experience by introducing negative or balancing feedback loops.
A balancing loop. So, a system designed to intentionally slow the player down.
Yes, a balancing loop ensures that the further ahead you get, the harder the system pushes back against you.
Oh, interesting.
Katie Salen and Eric Zimmerman highlight the most famous and perhaps the most infamous example of this in all of gaming history.
Oh, I know where this is going.
The blue shell from Mario Kart.
The absolute destroyer of friendships. For anyone lucky enough to have avoided this trauma, here's basically how it works. If you are in first place in a Mario Kart race, you're driving flawlessly, totally dominating your friends, the game will randomly grant a player in the very back of the pack a blue shell item.
Yep.
And when they fire it, it ignores everyone else on the track, flies directly to you in first place, and blows you up, completely halting your momentum.
And players universally feel like the game is unfairly punishing them for demonstrating high skill.
Because it feels so cheap.
It does. But if we analyze it through the lens of flow theory, that isn't what's happening at all. The blue shell is a necessary, albeit aggressive, catch-up mechanic that manages the psychological states of all 8 players simultaneously.
Wait, really? How so?
Think about the states of the players. If you are a mile ahead of everyone else, you are seconds away from falling into the boredom zone because the challenge of the race has evaporated.
You're basically just doing time trials at that point.
Exactly. Conversely, the players in the back of the pack are falling into the anxiety zone, or worse, apathy, because the challenge of catching you seems mathematically impossible.
Oh, wow. So the game essentially throws a grenade at the leader to physically pull everyone back to the center of the pack.
The brilliance of the blue shell is the emotional cocktail it creates. By simply existing in the game's item pool, it introduces paranoia and tension for the player in first place.
It artificially injects a massive dose of anxiety to cure their impending boredom.
Precisely. And simultaneously, it gives the losing players a sudden surge of hope, pulling them out of apathy.
It compresses the skill gap just enough to keep everyone invested.
Yes, it ensures that all players remain engaged inside what game theorists call the magic circle of play.
Wait, the magic circle. You mean like the psychological boundary between the game world and the real world?
Yes, exactly. It's a concept coined by cultural historian Johann Huizinga. The magic circle is that invisible boundary where the rules of the real world are suspended and the artificial rules of the game take absolute precedence. As long as you care about winning the race, you are inside the circle. If the player in last place gives up and stops trying, they have mentally stepped out of the magic circle. The blue shell exists specifically to keep the losers inside that circle by convincing them they still have a chance.
That is fascinating.
Yeah.
So, bringing this all together, what does this mean for you, the listener? It means that feeling hooked on a game isn't an accident, and it certainly isn't a character flaw. It is the masterful, scientific application of the flow state.
Truly.
Game designers are constantly calculating the exact ratio of challenge versus skill. They are purposefully surfing your attention along a meticulously crafted wave of pacing, tensing, and releasing your emotions to manage your cognitive load.
Right.
And they are utilizing invisible feedback loops, whether it's the subtle nudge of an AI director or the violent explosion of a blue shell, to gently guide you back onto that tightrope.
It requires a profound level of psychological empathy and complex system design working in perfect harmony.
It really does. And if you want to see exactly how to chart this out for your own projects, whether you're designing a game, an app, or an educational curriculum, we actually have a deep dive video on flow mapping available in the full course.
But I do want to leave you with a final thought to mull over.
Oh, definitely.
Everything we've unpacked today has been framed around interactive media and video games. But the psychology of the flow channel applies to the human brain regardless of the activity.
Interesting.
I challenge you to look at your own life right now. Look at your daily chores, the way you manage your email inbox, or your overarching career trajectory.
Yeah.
If you are feeling deeply, chronically bored at work, it is highly likely your skills have outgrown your current challenges. If you are feeling constant, overwhelming anxiety, your daily challenges have outgrown your current skills.
Oh, wow. It's the exact same graph. The rules of the magic circle apply to reality.
They absolutely do. So the provocative question is this: how could you apply the principles of game design to gamify your own life? How could you implement your own dynamic difficulty adjustment or create negative feedback loops to intentionally pull yourself back into your own flow state?
Next time you blink and realize 3 hours have vanished into a project, a hobby, or a passion, remember, you aren't just passing the time. You've engineered your own perfect wave and you're surfing the flow channel.
Do you want to learn more about game design? Try our game design course. Go from learning the basics to becoming a master game designer. No coding skills needed. Taught by award-winning game designer Gabe Mack, this course is filled with hours of videos, puzzles, tools and exercises to turn you into a serious game designer. Why are you waiting to harness the power of play? Visit school.thegamebeyond.com to sign up today.